What if I told you that Indiana may actually have a shot to win the national championship? What if I told you that Indiana can do the unthinkable? A program that does not have half of its roster full of blue chip players. A program who last year finished the season 3-9 with one Big Ten win. They already have done many things that are unthinkable. Going 11-1 in conference, 8-1 or 8-1 in conference, 11-1 overall. And they stand right now on the brink of a playoff win, playing Notre Dame, who is also 11-1, not invincible, in South Bend, but again, home playoff game for Notre Dame. It's a single-digit spread in favor of Notre Dame. Indiana has a shot to win, clearly. That's why they're in the playoff. And from there, maybe they can go on a run. It would be challenging. It would be hard. It's not likely to happen, but it's possible. And I want to talk about why that's possible, why Indiana can go on a college football playoff run, why they can make some noise, and potentially why they can win the national championship, or at least make the national championship. So let's dive in here. As I have said time and time again, a good team, a national title contender, an elite team, their identity is as strong as a radiation-proof bunker, as a nuclear bunker, concrete reinforced with steel, with titanium. And Indiana's identity, their roster is not the best in the country. It's not. It's not as good as Ohio State's, as Penn State's, as Oregon's, the other teams in their sphere in the Big Ten. It is not as good as Georgia's or Texas's. It is one of the worst rosters in the playoff field. Just honestly, it is middle of the road in this playoff field at best. Might be one of the worst. I'd actually lean toward middle of the field the more I think about it, but not the best. But their identity is one of the strongest because they are the most fundamentally sound team in football. When I watch Indiana play, they remind me the most of a Nick Saban Alabama team. Now again, they're not the nation's best team in my mind. But what I mean by that is they're fundamentally sound. They tackle well. They always punch above their weight class. They destroy anyone who is similar to them or worse than them in talent. They do the little things well. They're physical. They're experienced, and they make great coaching decisions. And when they don't do any of those things, they learn from their mistakes. They are one of those teams who, as the year has progressed, has gotten better. They started off the year only beating FIU 31-7, and they didn't play a very good game. And they had a very easy out-of-conference schedule. And they allowed 24 points to Northwestern, for example, as a horrible offense. But then out of their first bye, they beat Nebraska 56-7. They handle Washington with a backup QB. They crush Michigan State on the road. They could have beaten Michigan to a pulp, but they took their foot off the gas in the second half. And they played one of the worst games that I've ever seen them play this year. In fact, their worst game by a mile in terms of quality, made uncharacteristic special teams mistakes, couldn't protect the QB, and they still were competing with Ohio State for a half. And it could have been a much more competitive game if they made less mistakes and Ohio State played the same game they did. This is a great team. Indiana can make some noise in the college football playoff. They can cause some chaos. They can be an agent of chaos in the postseason as they have been in the regular season. Their weakness is clearly team talent and lack of elite depth. I don't think from an individual roster or player standpoint, like looking at things under a microscope, they have any weaknesses. They're similar to Oregon from the microscopic view, from looking at things position by position. Like they have one of the nation's best QBs in terms of efficiency. Their running back room is stacked. Their O-line is physical and protects rather well. They have a deep stable of receivers, good tight ends. Their run defense might be the nation's best. It's the best in the Big Ten right now. You look at their linebacker play, that helps there too. And even though their DBs are short and small, They have one of the better coverage units in the nation, and their special teams outside of that Ohio State game has been pretty good as well. It's the broad picture that is the problem for Indiana, where if they suffer an injury at any of those positions, the offensive line is a perfect example of this, where one of their starters went down, things are shakier. They don't have the same type of ability to just substitute in a similar caliber player if they suffer an injury like Ohio State does, unless it's the offensive line, that Penn State does, unless it's the wide receiver room, that Oregon does, unless it's, oh wait, they're deep at every position. Indiana is shallower than a lot of the higher level college football playoff teams, participants, in almost every position. Except for maybe quarterback, where I think Taven Jackson would be pretty good as the starter. Limited compared to Rourke, but pretty good nonetheless. I think he filled in pretty well in the second half against Nebraska, and more importantly, against Washington. That is Indiana's weakness, is their lack of elite depth, and also their lack of team talent. But I think they've showed at multiple positions that they are talented, and I'm someone who thinks recruiting is important from a standpoint of recruiting rankings, the blue chip ratio from Bud Elliott, and these other rules surrounding that. That's important. I don't think it's as important as many people say. It is important, but Cignetti and his staff have only been there 1 year. They've only established their system for 1 year. So even though I think they develop at an elite level, they coach at an elite level, for many of these players, this is their first year in the system. So the entire process has not been hammered through all of these players' minds. Many of these players have not been incubated in the Cignetti system, and many of them do not have the same talent or potential that other players at different schools do have. So those are the limitations for IU, but I think they are strong, quite frankly, at every position, and they are well coached in the microscopic point of view. When you look at their starters and even some of the two-deep at different positions, I think their D-line two-deep is pretty good. It's the same thing at running back, where they have 3-4 power 4 caliber running backs, and I think Justice Ellison is a great running back. Wide receiver is deep. QB is deep. They have depth on many parts of the defense. I mean, this is a strong team that we have here in Indiana. They're a team that is not to be underestimated, and people have been underestimating them for weeks now. And part of it makes sense. But also, the regular season's over. They're 11-1. They're dominant in points per play margin. They're very efficient. And it's not like they have a strength of schedule that's outside the top 100 anymore. They've played OSU, and their efficiency metrics dropped from number 3, number 2, number 4 to 5, 6, and 7. They didn't collapse. They just kind of went, meh. Okay, a little bit of a recalibration here. Indiana is not a top 4 team, but they're not top 10, for example. I love Indiana. I think that they are one of the easiest teams to root for because they're fundamentally sound and because they're aggressive. And they throw the kitchen sink at you, too. That's another part of their identity. And they also have a little bit of that boa constrictor feel, where they love to run the ball for 3 to 4 or 5 yards because they don't have a really explosive rushing game. It's more of a power run game. They love to power run at you, systematically throw, use the RPO, and really control time of possession and squeeze the life out of opposing defense. And then their defense is a little bit of the opposite, in the sense that they let other teams game control them, but really in between the 20s. And then they play bend but don't break, and they rarely, if ever, break in the red zone. Teams love to go for it on fourth down against this Indiana defense, and then Indiana loves to turn them away on fourth down in their own territory. They are strong at quarterback, wide receiver, and then D-line, linebacker, and DB. O-line's a bit shakier than these other positions. Same with tight end, and running back has a lot of good and great players, but no players, that I would describe as elite. They have a great passing attack. It's very systematic, and their run stoppage is elite. They're holding teams to under 3 yards per carry this season. They limited Ohio State. They limited Michigan. They held Michigan and Michigan State, I believe, to season-low rushing yards. Nebraska couldn't run on them, which isn't really a surprise, but still. Washington, outside of a few runs from Jonah Coleman, couldn't do anything against them. They have a great rushing defense, an elite rushing defense, I would say. Now, these are strong points, and Indiana is a team that has some limitations that we already discussed that really relate to the whole roster, not just individual position groups. But I think that Kurtis Rourke, when he's on, is one of the better QBs in the country. I think that Elijah Sarratt and Omar Cooper Jr. at wide receiver are some of the Big Ten's better wide receivers. I think that Mikail Kamara, CJ West, and Tyrique Tucker can go toe-to-toe with almost any O-line in the country. And I think that D'Angelo Pons, who's a little bit smaller than most DBs, with his jump, with his football IQ, with his anticipation, with his hands, can more than make up for some of his own physical limitations. I mean, he is the embodiment of Indiana, where Indiana has limitations that other schools don't necessarily have, but they make up for it. I mean, they persevere, they endure, and they fight. And they fight more than a lot of other teams fight. And they're one of the toughest teams in the country. They're as tough as nails. Their non-negotiable is their defensive line. I can't think of any other position for Indiana that I could classify as a non-negotiable. Like Ohio State shut down their wide receivers, in part because of Indiana's offensive line, but also they did well in coverage. Kurtis Rourke, when things aren't going well, he's not really someone who can carry you through a game. It's the same thing with their running backs, tight ends. Their secondary has some limitations that I think prevent them from being a non-negotiable. But their D-line is mean. It's a little undersized at D tackle, but CJ West isn't undersized. He's one of their starting D tackles right now. And then Tyrique Tucker and James Carpenter are very impressive. And Mikail Kamara is a big, physical, fast defensive end. Linnell Carr Jr. is a great defensive end. They only allow 76.2 opponent rushing yards per game, which is first. They only allow 2.6 yards per carry, which is second. And they're 37th in sack percentage with a 7.38 sack percentage. This is one of the better defenses in the country, Indiana's is, because of this defensive line, which wreaks havoc against opponent pass protection units and shuts down the run. They make you throw on them. They make you one-dimensional. It was part of the reason why Ohio State took so long to dominate IU. They couldn't run on them. So even though they were passing all the time and having a lot of success through the air, when Indiana had one play in the red zone where they love to bend, but once you get in the red zone, they do not break very often, they covered well. Howard threw it into tight coverage, ball bounced around, and it was picked off. And then Ohio State's previous red zone trip, 4th and 1, they run it shotgun up the middle, and it's stuffed. Their O-line didn't get any push, which they didn't have Seth McLaughlin, so I completely understand why that is. But I think that this Oregon D-line would defend they defend the run exceptionally well against Oregon. I would not be shocked at all if they forced Penn State's rushing offense to have some pretty serious issues. I do think this is one of the best rushing defenses in all of college football. The defensive line for Indiana is absolutely a non-negotiable, and it can help them win playoff games, make a playoff run. And I mean, heck, if they can win the national title, which I don't know if they can, but I do think there is a world where they do. Very small odds of it, but I think it's possible. It would be because of their D-line, where, they shut down Georgia's rushing attack completely. And maybe if it's Carson Beck or if it's Gunnar Stockton, maybe they have time to throw. Stockton can't run, and since he doesn't have alien receivers or tight ends, he can't really throw all that well. And maybe Indiana forces him turnovers, or they get the ball to their offense several times by forcing punts, and Indiana racks up TOP and eventually exhausts Georgia's defense, maybe. Or against Notre Dame. Notre Dame has had some issues on defense, and then maybe when Notre Dame's offense tries to play catch-up or they're trying to score, all they have is their rushing offense. And if Indiana can step up and stop Notre Dame's rush attack, and maybe they can take advantage of some questionable receivers that Notre Dame has, for example. So this is a tough, tough team with a unit on the defensive line that is one of the nation's best, that is a close to an Ohio State, Penn State. I'd actually say it's better than Ohio State's D-line. I think IU is a better D-line than OSU does. Similar caliber to Penn State. It's better than Oregon's in my mind. The only units I can think of that are ahead for sure, or at least potentially ahead, are Penn State, Michigan, and South Carolina. And those are elite D-lines who are each full of one or several alien players. The X-Factor players for IU on offense are quarterback Kurtis Rourke, Justice Ellison at running back, Elijah Sarratt at wide receiver Omar Cooper Jr., center Mike Caddick, who has been a beast this year, and tackle Carter Smith, who's one of the Big Ten's better offensive tackles. These are players who make an impact. They won't necessarily carry the game on their own. That's what I define as alien players, and I don't think IU has any alien players on offense, but these are players who can help make or break a game. And I think Kurtis Rourke, when he's on, can do that. Justice Ellison does very well at running the ball. Running back with great vision, great patience, good feet, and he has some power behind him too. The offensive line is filled with great players. Omar Cooper Jr. is an explosive wide receiver, and Sarratt's a reliable weapon. Defensively, C.J. West, he might be the closest thing that Indiana has to an alien player, along with Mikail Kamara at defensive end. And then you got to remember about defensive tackle Tyrique Tucker as well. Walker at linebacker is impressive, and then D'Angelo Pons and Jones at the nickelback position. What can I say? Indiana's a great secondary. I think they have a defense that is close to, if not a top 10 unit. Their offense, when it's high functioning, is good too. They have the pieces to make a playoff run. And if they can make a playoff run with how weak the field is this year, if they can make a playoff run, who's to say they can't win a national title? So prepare yourselves for the unthinkable, because we've seen the unthinkable all season long. And who's to say we can't see the unthinkable in the college football playoff? We probably will. We will probably see some type of upset that many people thought was insane occur, whether it's in the first round, the second round, the third round. Maybe we'll see insanity in the national champion. We have the weakest national champion in college football history, or at least in the modern era. I don't know, but it's been chaos all season long. It's been very unpredictable. And I think Indiana's a team who can once again take advantage of that. And I think that they are one of the nation's better college football teams. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much. And also, share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do. And comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Conlo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my all-conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.